Hey guys, so if you're watching on Facebook Live, welcome to the second episode of Ask James. We are live in our studio. We are on Facebook Live for the first 5 minutes. We do broadcast the whole episode live on our Patreon page at patreon.com/CyberHub Engage. That's Patreon, Patreon.com.
Patreon, Patreon.
A-N or O-N?
Oh, now I'm confused. It's in the description.
It's in the description below, but if you go there and you become a supporter, you get this full episode for the whole time. You get to interact with me and Micah live. The rest of the time, we're on here for the next few minutes with y'all on Facebook Live. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Very interesting few weeks. We've got some really great content that just we put out. Ken Visiana from First Data was in the studio with us yesterday. We're talking data governance. That episode is live on iTunes, Google Play, and everywhere else on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe and listen to that video. We talk about that episode. We talk about data governance and cybersecurity and the different ways people can really learn from data and how data can really help security. And we spent the better part of our afternoon out at the University of North Georgia with the great Dr. Bryson Payne, and that episode is going to be coming next week. But our listeners just can't wait for the next episode. They had a ton of questions for us, Micah. So with me is Micah, and he's taking selfies and pictures as you guys are watching here, and being the social media nerd that he is.
Someone's got to do it.
Working it out. So with that being said, Micah, I think we got a ton of questions. Do you want to, let's start off with the first question, and then we will turn off our Facebook Live feed. And if you are on Patreon, don't go anywhere. And if you're on Facebook Live, you can go to patreon.com/CyberHub Engage. Become a Patreon of CyberHub Engage. You not only get to ask James things, you get so many cool things. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Why don't you go ahead and rattle off a couple things?
Well, you get some really cool swag at some of our higher levels, like cool mugs and T-shirts. Mm-hmm. You also get our exclusive content first.
We will give you a shout-out on Twitter, and we'll give you a follow, and we'll also put your name in the credits.
And I also get to say your name.
Yep.
Any name you put on there. Any name?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Any name?
Any name.
Any name. So you can name yourself whatever you want. We'll still say it, I guess.
And there's a lot of cool exclusive perks to becoming a Patreon. And most of all, the most important thing about becoming a Patreon is you will be helping us produce more content.
You become part of the CyberHub Engage family. Mm-hmm. That's how we
And if we get a $100 a month Patreon, we're going to start a whole new podcast, which is really cool. I'm hoping that somebody helps us out with that.
Me too.
Tales of the Dark Web.
Beyond the Breach. That shouldn't have like rap music though, should it?
It should have some dramatic music.
It should have dramatic music. Awesome. So we've got our first question of the day. Where is it coming from, Micah?
Our first question is coming from Hong Kong. Lynn writes,
Ni hao.
There are a lot of news about Chinese company Huawei.
Huawei. Yeah.
The Chinese company Huawei, there's a lot of, they've been in the news recently. Are they a real state actor, or is this just media overreacting? Good question.
Great question from Hong Kong. So I'll kind of get started on this question real quick, and at that point, we'll kind of disconnect the live feed because we've got the 5-minute limit, and we've been on for how long now, Micah?
I don't
know. So a few things about Huawei. Obviously, their CFO's in house arrest in Canada because of a U.S. order, a U.S. extradition order for she's wanted in the U.S. for evading Iranian sanctions. And doing so kind of in a different way. I won't get into that political thing. Are they a state actor? I think China has different rules and laws that govern their corporation. Most corporations the government has a very strong hand in Chinese corporations. And so you tend to see that a lot of Western nations don't really trust some of the telecommunications companies coming out of China simply because they feel like by using their technology, they're giving a backdoor to the Chinese government. Now, I'm going to keep answering these questions and get in a little bit more into this, Lynn. So make sure you go to our Patreon page and subscribe, and you'll see us live there. For the Facebook Live piece, this is it. Lynn, I'm going to keep answering your questions on Patreon here. So for everyone tuning in on Facebook Live, thanks for watching, and we're going to be moving directly to Patreon.
Yeah. So if you want to join us, go into the description, click the link, and we'll see you there.
So Lynn, we kind of go back to your question about Huawei. And there's a few more things that play into this. I mean, really, the media does tend to cover things a little differently. I mean, but Huawei is a very global company with a lot of influence. They have been known to have some IP theft and so forth. And so I think until China kind of aligns its IP laws and privacy laws with everyone else, we're really not going to see the media or Western governments, for that matter, change the way they view Huawei. We do see a lot of different news about how, Huawei claims to be very independent, that they're really not a longer arm of the government, of the Chinese government, but there is a lot of different calculations from a national security standpoint, as well from a competitive advantage standpoint, that are currently restricting Huawei. I hope that with the new trade deal that's being kind of discussed between the Trump administration and President Xi's staff, that they find a way to kind of overcome this, because technology does need kind of global cooperation. But until that's really resolved, it's going to be a bit difficult. So, Lynn, thanks for listening, and thanks for the question. Micah, what do we got next?
Our next question is from Ian from Manchester, UK. James, I love your podcast. What attacks scare you the most? What's the doomsday scenario in cyber for you?
Ian, man, put me on the hot seat. So, a few things. In the podcast I did yesterday with Dr. Payne, we were talking about some of the doomsday scenario that really scare us all in terms of cybersecurity. There's a few that really stand out for me. I think the biggest piece is communications, right? So in war, you always took out the communications of your adversary so that they couldn't, communicate back and forth. And in today's world, it's so easy to do because internet is used so widely and it's so easily accessible. And just if you think of shutting down internet, you pretty much shut down communication. Most phone lines today are still VoIP. So that is one scenario that really scares me. Another one is just an attack on our critical infrastructure, whether it be a dam or an electrical grid or a few other things. Those kind of, I don't want to say terrify me, but those really do scare me a bit and put me in a position where I'm a little uneasy about it. And I think in Western countries and democracies, in Europe, the U.S., Canada, and other places where utilities and critical infrastructure is privatized, scares me even more, simply because we haven't seen the kind of cooperation that I think is needed to make that a very successful relationship. Ian, but that's a great question. Thanks for listening. I think that's kind of my doomsday thing is taking down internet and then maybe exploding a dam on some people without being able to let them know that, cowering water.
Could you imagine Black Friday?
With no internet?
No internet, no lights, put in a little bit of panic.
I think people panicked from the slightest thing.
No social media would have people really panicking, I think, because it would be
so
bizarre.
It would be like withdrawals, right? It'd be like a crackhead not getting his fix.
That's interesting. Yeah.
People would be like out on the street like, neighbor, did you go to the gym? Did you go to the gym?
Well, think about Y2K, all the hype, Yeah. I remember I was, 2000. I was like 16, 17 years old. I remember going and loading up all the cans of gas.
I remember like buying all the canned foods you had to put them in your
yeah.
pantry at the house. Yeah, get canned foods. Get foods that'll last you for a week or two.
Yeah.
The internet's gonna stop. The world's gonna stop existing on December 31st, 1999. Interesting.
Maybe it did. Maybe we're in a different dimension.
Wouldn't that be weird?
Yep.
I mean, we haven't drank or smoked anything today.
All right.
What's
Ready?
our next question?
It's from Miri from Canada.
Yeah, boot.
Let's see. In your opinion, what's the future of the cybersecurity industry? Should I consider working for a cybersecurity vendor or a company in a cybersecurity position? That is a good question.
You know, for people who want to get a job in cyber, I think a lot of them kind of almost always want to go work for an organization like a bank or a financial company or the government. People forget about the cybersecurity vendors.
Yeah, especially like startups. You could really get your foot in the door.
Yeah, but so Miri, first of all, great question. Love Canada. I don't know what part you're from, but for next questions, please, if you're reporting where you're from, and we do ask where you're from, just say the city you're from as well, just so that kind of helps us out. So, what's the future of cybersecurity? So, we're going to see consolidation. I think if we talk about it from a general point of view, we're going to see a lot of consolidation happening in cybersecurity. Part of it's going to be bigger companies trying to get in on the cybersecurity field. I think we're starting to see that now with IBM, Cisco, Google, AT&T. I think a lot of these big conglomerates realize that security is the future and are starting to diversify their portfolio and increase their services to kind of address that. The biggest space of cybersecurity, the biggest opportunity isn't enterprise businesses. It's the small, medium-sized companies that really don't have a CISO. And having said that, I think that's where the opportunity lies, and that's where the big conglomerates are trying to acquire a bunch of companies with different solutions that help solidify their offering, whether it be email or cloud or any other service that we rely on that is connected to the internet and is therefore cyber vulnerable, and play the long-term game of getting you to pay an extra $20 a month because they can afford it. AT&T can afford to sell you cyber that a startup couldn't afford to sell you for $200 for $20 over a period of time, just because their ARPU, their average revenue per user, is going to be higher. And when you have millions of subscribers, an extra $20 could mean an extra billions of dollars on your bottom line, so that acquisition ends up paying for itself a lot quicker. From a business standpoint, when you look at where you should consider working, well, if you're getting into the cyber field, I always say go into what you have a passion for. And so if it's developing and solving cybersecurity problems, a vendor might give you more resources to solve that problem than a company, because most companies are going to look for the cheapest route and solution to do this in, and vendors are kind of looking to more solve problems. So I think it's just what kind of solution and part you want to be in. I would definitely say look to work for a good cybersecurity vendor. Typically has so many different perks. A buddy of mine who I met at our first CyberHub Summit, Daniel Smith from Radware, he does some really cool stuff for the company. Really, really cool stuff. So, there are some ways to do some really cool things with cybersecurity vendors outside of just the traditional dev, sales, marketing, and whatnot. Thanks for listening, Mary. I appreciate your question.
All right.
What do we got, Micah?
This next question is from Michael from the U.S. Love the podcast. I like the David Nolan episode.
David Nolan from Aaron's.
Mm-hmm.
What episode was that? Like 9 or 10?
Yeah, that was way back.
That was way back. Yeah. So thanks for being a dedicated listener.
So lots of good information. For those of us new to the IT field, what would be considered entry level?
So, great question. So, if you mean IT as general IT, I'd say networking. I'm going to kind of transition to cybersecurity and InfoSec. And I think an analyst position is always entry. Forensics is entry. Pen testing, at its basics, could be considered a entry level position, and it just depends on really what you're trying to do. I think the question is very vague. So I would say an analyst for security, a junior pen tester for pen testing, and a junior network security guy. So just basic IT setup of basic network security hygiene would be entry level based on this question. So thanks for the question, Michael.
Let's see. All right, next question. Shiva from India. In India, they say careless employees pose the biggest cybersecurity threat to their companies. Is this only true in India or everywhere else?
So, Shiva, thank you for the question. Bless you, Micah.
Thanks.
So, here's what I would say. I think careless employees pose a big threat everywhere. It's not just in India. I saw the article you're talking about, Shiva, about 3 days ago, Micah. MSNBC in India posted an article talking about some survey that was done in India where they said India employees for Indian corporation pose the largest threat in cybersecurity. I think that's just a headline grabber, really. I think part of that, Shiva, is the fact that the human factor in cyber still exists. The number one attack vector is still phishing and social engineering. And as long as people continue to have kind of access to information and they are most likely to be fooled based on just basic human decency, they're bound to be the target. I don't think employees are reckless and careless because they want to be. I think people want to do a good job, and they want to do a good job for their employee. That's what I want to believe. They want to do a good job for their employees, for their employers. They want to be a good employee, and they want to be a loyal employee. They want their company to succeed because that's how they get paid. And so I find it very difficult within me to believe that employees are purposely careless. I do find that the lack of training plays a role in carelessness and recklessness of employees. And that comes in a few different ways. The first is most companies do the basic phishing exams. They don't measure it correctly. And sometimes it's about more training and shaming. And I don't feel like that really works. I think if you really want to measure a good employee, you measure him based on how is he interacting with different data and different emails that he's getting, not whether or not he fails that one phishing exam a quarter. I feel like that's I think that's cybersecurity needed a KPI, needed some sort of result. They needed to prove something to people who didn't understand cyber, so they came up with a phishing test, and whoever clicked on the link went to a page, and then they had to go into training and so much more. And I feel like that's only covering part of the problem. It's how are employees being trained of how to interact with different data, and how are they evaluating the data they interact with, and how are you as an employer using the data that every employee interacts with to measure whether they're accessing relevant or non-relevant data, whether they have a specific risk behavior with the data they interact with, whether it be their device, their networks, and so many other things. Part of it has to be with the BYOD culture, so bring your own device culture to a lot of companies. I think that's another part of challenges that exist within this. So no, it's not a problem in India. It's a problem globally, Shiva. I think people want to always point a finger at something somewhere, but don't take it personal. It exists everywhere, and I think the problem is that we measure employees' carelessness per se or recklessness in the wrong method. I think what we need to be doing is evaluating how they interact with data, how are they protecting data, and what kind of devices they're using, rather than whether or not they pass a phishing email test, which, with all due respect to a lot of people who do them and spend money doing it, I feel it's a bunch of bullshit.
Final question.
That's it?
Final question.
You didn't pick a lot of questions this time, Micah, did you?
I picked 6.
Okay.
Uh, this is from Tim from the U.S.
All right, Tim.
I've been working in my company's cybersecurity program for the last 3 years, and they replaced a CISO who's changing strategy, and my department could be getting fired based on the new strategy. So they replaced the CISO, and this CISO, and there's
The new guy is trying to
Right.
eliminate something he's working on. Okay.
right. So Tim says that he feels strongly that this program is crucial. What should he do?
Based on my note here, I see that Tim is actually one of our subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed to our CyberHub Engage website to be part of our mailing list, you don't really get some of our newsletters, but you also don't get to interact with some of the private stuff that we do that's only available to our subscribers. So go to cyberhubengage.com, subscribe to our newsletters, as well as some of the exclusive content we give to our subscribers, and also Patreon. Gives you a few other perks that you don't get by being a website subscriber.
The subscriber form is in the footer as a note.
Thank you, Micah.
You're welcome. And the Patreon
Is in the header.
is in the header.
Yeah.
Patreon header, subscription,
Footer.
footer. Just to be clear.
Yes. So here's the Tim, you have a real dilemma, and I don't want to say it's a common dilemma, but it's a dilemma that exists for a lot of people who outlast a CISO. So, a CISO is typically replaced more often than his direct reports, and it ends up being like a football player who signs a 7-year contract with a team but gets 3 head coaches and then gets called a bust. If you're in a program for long enough and you have the right leader, you work for a Bill Belichick, you become Tom Brady, and if you're Alex Smith, you end up with 5 teams and you're just a marginal quarterback with some success. For those who understand football, that's a great example. And if you don't, Google it. So here's the deal, Tim. A lot of CISOs comes with different agenda, and sometimes the direction that one CISO is taking the company in doesn't really reflect well on the entire program or the company. And so they're essentially terminated and replaced with someone who may bring a fresh, new kind of view on security. I would see what skills you have to maybe join a different team, or have a sit down with the new CISO and explain some of the work you're doing, explain the logic behind it. Most CISOs are very, very reasonable people. They very rarely tend to be unreasonable. So I don't want to believe that if you go and you say, hey, what we're doing is really important, that he wouldn't take it seriously. It could be that the former CISO didn't properly explain it during the transition, if there was one, or the other VPs that report to the CISO, and I don't know what title you have, Tim, but that could be to help us kind of point us out in the right direction in terms of advice. But other CISOs could really look at it and go, I don't really understand this program and I'm going to eliminate it. So what I would recommend, Tim, is to really try to get a sit down with the CISO if you can as soon as possible. Make sure you explain the value of the program you're working on and why you've been working on it for so long and why it's important to the company. And try to understand from the new CISO's new direction, and if this program fits in, and if it doesn't, don't take it personal. See if you can still stay in the same organization and excel under the CISO. And if not, there's a huge job shortage for cybersecurity professionals. I don't think you'll have a problem.
Yeah, and your CISO probably has a vast network. If you, don't take it personally and you leave on good terms, it could probably give you a pretty good reference.
Absolutely. And there's a job shortage, so there's never any shortages on that end. Tim, so I hope that helps you out, Tim. I want to thank, so I'm going to read off the names of everyone who submitted a question. So Lynn from Hong Kong, Ian from Manchester, England. Good luck with Brexit, Ian. You guys are in the crucial month. We're a month before Brexit, and there's still no deal. Mary from Canada, Aboot. Michael from the U.S., Shiva from India, and Tim from the U.S. So I want to say thank you so much for your questions. If you're watching us live on Patreon, we are going to continue going live here. So I'm going to disconnect here for a second with everyone who's on, iTunes listening to the segment. We do provide 15 extra minutes of live Q&A with some of our Patreon subscribers through our exclusive feed for our Patreon subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed to our Patreon page yet, go to patreon.com, patreon.com/CyberHub Engage. Make sure you support our podcast. We're really picking carefully our sponsors and trying to really maintain integrity so that we don't just spew out sponsored content that brings no benefit, and we continue to kind of be true to our mission and very real in the kind of information we share. We are launching 2 new shows, and as part of our Patreon, you get those shows first, and you also get the exclusive content from every video, an additional 15 to 20 minutes with every guest first on our Patreon page that you don't get anywhere else. So make sure, again, you go to patreon.com/CyberHub Engage for more information. This is the Ask James segment. I'm with Micah Smith, who is our producer and co-host on the show.
Hello.
Thanks, Micah. If you want to submit questions, you can do that through our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn,
YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, go into the descriptions. I have a link to everything that you possibly could ask for to get in touch with us.
As well as you can follow me on Twitter, James_Azar1, and interact with me there. DM me, right? That's the term. I don't want to sound like a nerd, but yeah, DM me. I'm lit. If our interns were here, they would love to hear me say that. So make sure you subscribe, follow us on all of our social media. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your questions. My name is James Azar. I am your host, and you're listening to the CyberHub Engage podcast, Ask James segment.